And I'm not gonna lie, like, it's so weird opening up Disney Plus and you're like, what's going on, guys? Hope you're all doing well. Now for today's video, we're going to be talking about Alien Earth. The first 2 episodes have just dropped, and I gotta be honest with you guys, this was one that I wasn't really anticipating talking about that much because the trailers and all the promotional material really did not look that interesting to me up until the last bits of behind the scenes information they revealed. So the first couple episodes are out, and I went into it for the most part blind, apart from knowing that it was a prequel. My overall thoughts on this series so far, based off of the episodes Neverland and Mr. October, are that this is actually, so far, one of the best alien things that we've seen in quite a while. I would say I even prefer it to Alien Romulus. It could go the other way, and I could end up not liking it that much, but based off of what we've seen so far, I have to say that the set design, the aesthetic of the future, everything to do with the actual way that they're handling the alien universe, as well as the threat of the Xenomorph, very good. I would go as far to say that it's some of the best stuff we've seen since Alien 3. Maybe even go back as far as Aliens. But, you know, people say that about every new entry that comes out for everything. So I want to actually dive into some of the stuff that I think this show does really, really well. Because there's this other underlying element of the Alien series that they've been doing so far that I thought was super interesting. I've actually been seeing the Alien franchise move in this direction ever since arguably Alien vs. Predator, so I'll talk more about that later. But overall, the main story idea for Alien Earth so far is the problem of death. We have our lead character played by Sydney Chandler, who is basically going to die. She is a young cancer survivor or cancer patient that has a body that is going to basically die one day. This is not really spoiler heavy, by the way. This is something that happens at the beginning of the very first episode. So what happens is she goes on this journey of becoming a synthetic. Now, we've seen this idea done here and there in other forms of media, especially science fiction over the last 20, 30 years, but Alien Earth kind of dives full on into the ideas of death, the problem with death, and immortality, which is something that Prometheus dived into, as well as some of the other movies. But the frailty of the body and kind of the corporate greed behind the Prodigy Corporation, and it's kind of parallel to the Blade Runner series, is super interesting in my opinion. I'm not gonna lie, I did not expect this movie to be as Blade Runner-esque as it currently is, and I don't know what to think of that just yet. As soon as I saw like the first episode, I was like, let me ask my buddies that are actually way bigger fans than I am what they think about Blade Runner and Alien and all the rumors about them being in the same timeline. So I asked my good friend Tony from Hack the Movies and my friend Jack Ewens, who of course has worked on all the Jurassic Park stuff in the past. You know, I was like, so are they in the same universe or not? Because Ridley Scott seems to say yes, and official canon stuff in comic books or maybe even movies like Soldier and blah blah blah, and he said no, and Jack said he didn't think so either. But this movie is definitely leaning into a Blade Runner messaging with the whole synthetic / replicant story. And I gotta say, it's one of the strongest parts of Alien Earth. I would argue that Alien Earth so far has characters that are way more compelling than Alien Romulus, which I gave a positive review of, but I felt like Alien Romulus was a little too bare bones. So Alien Earth is something that I think is much, much more interesting in terms of the character dynamics and how they're interacting within the Alien universe. Now, there is a lot of stuff in this first episode that I felt went way too far with echoing scenes from the original Alien from 1979, which, again, I have a whole video talking about that movie alone on the channel if you're interested in that. They echo the opening of the Nostromo when everyone wakes up from cryo sleep, and even down to like hanging out at the little table, and there's a cyborg character, not quite fully synthetic, that they don't trust very well. I don't know. I felt that was kind of unnecessary, and I don't really think that we needed a practical they do this stuff in reboots and remakes all the time, or just sequels to older material. I felt like it went a bit too far, which is one of the big problems I had with Alien Romulus, and one of the things that I thought Jurassic World Rebirth was really guilty of in the third act, but it is what it is. So And honestly, it's beautifully shot and beautifully edited too. And I would go as far to say that the ideas of the Lost Boys and everything to do with this group of prototype synthetic human hybrids, where they're basically test subjects for this trillionaire like prodigy man child guy that's basically going out and trying to make a profit. There's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot of stuff in Alien Earth that I actually think is much more interesting than I think we've seen in a long time in this entire franchise. The alien creature itself, the Xenomorph, is done very well here. I really like the fact that they're going for a suit in a lot of the scenes. It does look very much like Ridley Scott's first one with the movements and everything. I still think that they can't really nail the suspense of the first or second movies, or even Alien 3 in some areas, but it does a good job. Of course, it's made for TV. It's not like a full-length feature, but these ideas that Noah Hawley are bringing to not only the Xenomorph, but also the world itself and the different ways that it can attack people are fun. Episode 2, little too far with the craziness. There's one scene in particular in episode 2, which leans way more in the colonial marine side of things, that felt like there's just no way. I know they thought it would be cool to have a guy crawling on the ground the way he did. No spoilers. But, no. I don't believe it. Like, when you break the barrier of reality and a suspension of disbelief, it's like the gymnastics scene in The Lost World. It's like, yeah, but no. The Xenomorph is really fun in the movie. It feels a lot like the first film. It goes crazy attacking and killing people a little too much, I think, where it kind of feels a little too detached from the creature in the shadows and corridors that was much more like a vampire in the original Alien. This time it's much more like a velociraptor, where it's just like destroying people everywhere and there's just a room full of blood and it leaves. And that's something that I think is a bit, I don't know. It's cool, but it's a very different way to apply the Xenomorph action and suspense and terror scenes than we've seen before. The other monsters that are in this thing, which are very interesting to me because they are actually the focus of the plot itself, is that there was this expedition where they were gathering specimens that Weyland-Yutani has, and they crashed on Earth. This is a prequel. It's still kind of janky with that whole placement in the timeline anytime you do a prequel like that, but I gotta say, guys, the other creatures are very well designed and they feel like they fit into the universe of the Alien series. A lot of them, in my personal opinion, feel like they are inspired from a lot of the Alien ripoff movies from the 80s. You've got this creature that kind of like burrows into some guy's neck that reminded me a lot of Titan Find, or Creature from 1985. Got a whole review of that movie on the channel. There's also another creature that reminds me of like a plant pod thing that you would see in Prometheus or Alien Covenant. But there's another eyeball guy that reminded me of Alien 2 on Earth, the unofficial sequel to Alien. Review of that is up on the channel as well. Yeah, I really like the eyeball guy. I don't know why, but that feels so old school pre-Aliens style monster movie action, and it is dark with what they do with the creature. Now overall, I feel like the first episode is much stronger than the second. My critiques are really mainly around the whole misuse of nostalgia and replications of scenes. I feel like Aliens wasn't really done justice with the second episode, quite frankly. I feel like Alien Earth's episode of Mr. October is fine, but it veers more in like tonality of like Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom with some of the stuff that Alien does. It's like an Indoraptor, so take that for what it is. Now, the core arguments behind this series so far are the relationships between a human, a cyborg, a synthetic, and a hybrid. There's like a little hybrid team, and the main juxtaposition of the drama and tension and suspense is like you've got the main character, Wendy, who is human in a synthetic body, and then you've got her quest to kind of reconnect with her brother, who is just a normal human. That's interesting. There's a lot of ideas there that I don't think are fully fleshed out yet, but I'm really interested to see where they go, especially because they're diving more into the Blade Runner style and aesthetic, especially with one of the characters that is going along with the Prodigy Corporation. But all in all, I think one of the biggest weird things about the Alien franchise for me lately is this Gnostic overtone that it just seems so obvious, like watching the first episode and the second episode of Alien Earth, because you have this problem of death. death, right? But you don't know what to do about that problem except for gain more knowledge into this ascent past being a human and being something more. Like you're not even your body, you're this soul trapped in a body. And that's actually a very ancient Christian heresy. And the Alien series has kind of been headed in this direction. I might do a whole video on this in the future. I just give my thoughts on the entire franchise as a whole. But starting with Alien versus Predator, where you get the whole chariot of the gods idea of like the aliens and the predators being like this thing that are from another planet, and the humans are these little like nothing creatures. You've got Prometheus, which dives into the whole, it's in the title, it's in Prometheus. It's the same problem of life and death and of immortality. An Alien Covenant goes a step further with this, which is kind of this whole Kronos versus Uranus thing, where David, the synthetic, is destroying his creator, which is the creator of his creator, the humans, the engineers, by wiping out like the civilization on the planet. And then he's creating this Nephilim adjacent monster protomorph thing that kills people. And the serpent's idea in the Alien franchise is very interesting with the devil. One of the strongest messages and elephants in the room as far as this whole franchise goes is Alien 3, which has a distinctly Christian like idea throughout the whole thing versus these much more Gnostic prequels/sequels that we've gotten with Prometheus, Alien Covenant, Alien Romulus, and now Alien Earth. And the idea of the frailty of the body is explored a lot here, alongside like the fear of death from not only cancer but also the alien itself killing the people that are like here to survive. The first 3 Alien movies were much more just based around survival and like fear of the unknown and like fear of the dark and of monsters, and but they had this moral undertone, especially with Aliens and Alien 3. I find this whole conversation fascinating, and the fact that Alien Earth is really diving into this, I don't even think the filmmakers are aware of where a lot of these ideas originate. So yeah, a lot to unpack there. I don't really know what they can do with the alien aspect of this science fiction story. I will admit, part of me feels like the Xenomorph is shoehorned into a Blade Runner story that is set in the Alien universe, if that makes any sense. Everything feels very modern. Everything feels like they can't really know where good comes from or truth or reality, but they know that it has to exist. And they also have this kind of, I don't want to say nihilistic, but there is a nihilistic undertone of where there's it's a very, I've seen this before in other forms of media in the modern age. It really feels like just people being lost, where they don't know how to navigate life except for the reality that they will die. So from this position, the writers have crafted this story that at times feels very ancient in its existentialism, especially on a human level, but also very misguided, as if the point of salvation is to escape the body and become this sort of superior robot. Very interesting. I think that episode 1 did a really good job at basically giving us a very high budgeted and well acted and well written human story about the problems that we face with life and death. Of course, that is kind of ramped up to 1,000,000 with the presence of the Xenomorph. That whole idea is kind of pushed in here in a way to make a science fiction story that is much more along the lines of the messaging of Prometheus or Alien Covenant, only with the scariness of the Xenomorph monster, which is admittedly kind of in the background. Like, it's a big part of the story, but it's not the focal point. The focal point is the actual story between Wendy and her brother. So there's a lot going on there that is very interesting, and I would argue this is the one Alien property that is the most closely linked to Blade Runner, and it feels like it's a much more focused story about the human problem of death. I can already tell that the synthetic character with the blonde hair, I don't remember his name, I'm sorry, he's someone that I really want to dive more into in the future. I hope they expand upon him, and I'm really interested to see like where you can take everything. But those are all just my own thoughts and opinions on Alien Earth. So right now, I think it's a pretty well-directed show, very well written. I'm liking the characters. I'm liking the direction they're taking this whole series in so far. I would like to see them expand upon some of the ideas that ultimately culminated in Alien 3's ending with Ripley and her character arc, because that kind of that whole idea and framework of the world of Alien, I think is the most interesting stuff that this franchise could go in. And we'll see how they do in the future seasons if this thing keeps continuing. I would really like to see more of a cohesion between this and not only Romulus, but Alien Isolation with Amanda Ripley and the Alien series with Ellen Ripley as a whole, because that's where everything really has its meat and potatoes and is the strongest. But Alien Earth is just modern storytellers lost in this weird existential threat of Gnostic ideas that have crept into their heads that they can't really deal with. It seems like they're asking some really interesting questions. I'm going to talk about a lot more of this in the future if I continue watching the series and have time to do so, because from my point of view, which is very different from a Southern Baptist or an Anglican or whatever, I'm an Orthodox Christian, Eastern Orthodox, so this is very intriguing to me. But alright guys, whatever your own thoughts and opinions happen to be, let me know all about them in the comments down below. Let me tell you something, brother. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. I really appreciate it, and if you'd like to see more, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification so you can be updated when I put out new videos. God bless you all. Christ is King. I hope you all enjoyed your time, and as always, take it easy.